Mike Walker. Welcome to Supply Chain Visit for Pharma podcast.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Yeah, great to have you, and I'm very excited to have a visionary, join us for the pharma industry. And I want, I know I'm not going to do justice by introducing you because I should turn it over to you and like for our audience, introduce yourself. Mike is in Microsoft as an executive director in healthcare industry as an expert joining us today to share his experience and his vision for the future. But I want to get to know you a little bit for our audience. Can you maybe take a few minutes, introduce your background, how you fell in pharma?
It was an interesting journey. I've spent my career in very much, cross-functional roles, going across industries, but there's been one common theme, and that's been, big problem solving, corporate strategy, that's focused on not just, how we take a technology from here to there, but really how do we transform a business, create net new business models. And so, through that journey, and I'll give you guys a little color here in a moment, but through that journey, um, you know, bouncing around from different industries, what I found is, um, you know, no one's got this problem completely solved. And, it just so happens here, the latest industry that I've gone really, really deep into is the life sciences world, because, in a lot of ways, they were a lot like oil and gas back in, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where, things were very good. They could afford to, get away with maybe suboptimal processes and technologies. But now, just like with life sciences, it kind of catches up, and new factors come into play, new entrants into the marketplace, et cetera. So, I'd mentioned spending a lot of time in corporate strategy, enterprise architecture type of roles. That had led me to, engaging with lots of pharmas over the years, and kind of seeing that natural evolution of really mindset of we've always done it this way, and we're going to keep doing it this way, to hey, we got to change. We have to change. And so the willingness to make that leap is now there, which is really, really exciting. So I spent a lot of time at Gartner as well. I was their VP of Technology Innovation and CTO Strategy. Wrote, I think it was like 400 research notes, something along those lines. Um, I was responsible for the emerging technologies hype cycle, which was a great experience because it allowed me to really bring together the startup community with academia, with corporate innovation boards, and with high tech companies, and really seeing those different angles and perspectives really kind of helps you kind of frame innovation for your own organization. So I've tried to take a lot of those lessons learned through that experience and through previous experience in doing digital transformation to pharma, to hopefully not make the same mistakes that we've done in the past.
Yeah. So like one interesting question I asked, like what stunned you or what made you like surprised when you came to pharma after doing all this work in other industries? What really stood out for you when you came to pharma?
I mean, when I was first introduced to pharma, we're going back 10 or so years, but it was still, very, very much riddled with paper. Um, and so, I wasn't super surprised back then. But then when I got back in more deeply to find that not really much had changed, I was really surprised by just a lot of the manual processes that were still in place. And some of it's for legitimate business reasons. It is a risk adverse industry that's highly regulated. And, you want to make sure that, I mean, you're dealing with people's lives here, making medicine. So you want to be careful. But I was really surprised by the lack of movement of maturity in this industry. But again, there's lots of reasons for that. It's not because anybody's lazy or doesn't want to do anything. It's more around the risk management side. But now with some of the newer regulations, it's really forcing their hands to make sure that they don't have any more technology debt or obsolescence in their environments, because they need to be secure. They need to be sustainable, efficient, etc.
And it is one of those industries that you just cannot do without, right? Like, there are a lot of people who need this to sustain their life. There are lots of life-saving medicines. There are things that people depend on to just quality of their life. And it's a trillion plus $1.2 trillion industry. So,
Yes.
similar to your background, like when I did, lots of different industry consulting, and when I landed in pharma, like I got shocked to see like all this paper around, all the spreadsheets. And to be honest, like we are still in that category a little bit, like,
Oh
there's
yeah.
change coming, but I wouldn't say that pharma did a leapfrog change and are ahead of the other industries. Like the last few years, I think the research reports show that pharma is still one of the least digitized industries, and for some good reasons, and some reasons that are more like status quo. But I know that in your new role in Microsoft as like the visionary and digital strategist in healthcare and life sciences, you want to change that, right? So you're looking at the future and you're telling a story of what the future looks like, especially for manufacturing companies. So tell us, maybe first of all, like, why should the pharma industry care? Like, why would they think about the future and the change and the digitalization, AI and smart manufacturing and all of that? Why would they care?
Yeah, that's a great question. And why should they care? There's quite a few reasons. And so I think at a macro level, there are forces that are being pushed upon the pharma industry, the big pharmas, around new market entrants. These are startups, biotech companies that are really outperforming the big pharmas in getting issuing of patents from the FDA. And so those patents are, drugs or products. They could be, multi-million, multi-billion dollar products over the course of 20 years. So with that, it's really forcing these folks to think like, oh, are we innovating enough when it comes to discovery of drugs? And so that part's really exciting because now they're being forced to introduce these technologies to innovate. Um, Likewise, there are pressures from the government or governments, should I say, from a regulatory perspective that um, what we're seeing is whether it be sustainability, whether it be the FDA's Drug Security Act, where you've got to track and trace drugs to prove that it's not counterfeit and eliminate fraud, et cetera. Um, you know, that is again a force that they can't prevent, they can't stop. And then related to the first one is really all around new drug modalities. And, you know, it was fairly straightforward and easy, when we were just dealing with, small molecule, oral solid dose types of things, or, respirators, et cetera. And then maybe some peppered in some vaccines. Now, with, the explosion, the growth of biologics, which, I was really surprised to see that, that particular market close to 720 billion dollars in revenue by 2030. And, with that new type of modality, it's not like, making a t-shirt or toys or a widget of some sort where we just tweak our process, put a few more different materials, what have you. This is completely different. It fundamentally changes how I manufacture and distribute this particular product. Where in small molecule, it's largely a chemical process with minimal variation, to then where the variations explode. And we're talking about, a process similar to brewing beer, to keep it simple. So you're growing living organisms, extracting proteins, and all that through a distillation process down the line. And that requires a very different mindset. It requires different systems, and frankly, it opens up new opportunity. And so, whether it's biologics or cell and gene therapy, which again is another close to $100 billion industry, um, mRNA was a hit during COVID and will continue to be. It really forces the pharma's hands to say, if I want to stay competitive in the industry, I'm going to have to adapt to the market and be relevant in the market. And so, what's great about these new innovations, Everin, is that now that I have to create maybe a new factory, a new site with these products, that's an area where we can innovate. And that's an area where we don't have to necessarily worry about the legacy technology, all that paper that we were talking about, because we're starting from scratch essentially with that particular product. And so it opens up really interesting opportunities, and frankly, it's exciting to be able to be on the journey with a lot of these organizations and share some of the insights from my past and with working with other manufacturing industries. I worked a lot in aviation, helping
Mhm.
companies like Boeing and GE Aviation, et cetera, and kind of bringing those insights over and helping them accelerate the process.
Yeah, excellent. So, as a visionary, you're looking into the future, and there's, a big topic or big concept for pharma manufacturers, which is the factory of the future, right?
Yes.
So there's, well, what does it mean? And who has it, first of all? Do we have any factory of the future? Do we have little portions of the factory of the future? Like I want to first of all like set a baseline here. I mean, nobody knows the answer. I have a guess, but I want to ask your estimation of all these factories. Probably thousands, maybe a couple of tens of thousands of factories in pharma and life sciences. What percentage you think falls into category of this factory of the future? Single
Oh boy.
digit,
Oh
one,
yeah.
2%,
I would
10%.
say probably 1 to 3%, if I had to guess.
Okay.
Um, and so some of this again is legitimate because you know pharma companies, some are doing this, some are maybe indirectly doing it or maybe not doing it. I'm not sure. But what I advise customers to do is, yes, we want to innovate, we want to transform. I've got in my head what I think the factory of the future looks like. However, look at what you do as a portfolio. So you've got all these drugs, or let's just call them products. You've got these products in your portfolio. They're not all created equally. Some are going to be blockbusters, some aren't. And then of that list, you know, those products are like fruit and they expire. So that
Mhm.
patent, they've only got so much time. So when I look at my portfolio, I want to focus on, doing that digital transformation, that factory of the future on the drugs that are really going to either one, make me a ton of money here in the short term, those blockbuster drugs. Two, maybe it's an investment area. So many pharmas are heavily investing in biologics. Um, so maybe I want to target my innovations to those particular factories because the factory itself typically isn't a general purpose factory. It's usually fit for purpose for specific drugs that go through that particular factory that it's optimized for, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so I say 1 to 3% because we're going to whittle down that list, number one. Number two, they're risk adverse. So they're going to look at and go, okay, well, if I'm making all this money off this blockbuster drug, I need to be careful. And so what we find is we see these lighthouse sites where either pieces of the factory of the future, sometimes, like for example, Pfizer was recently recognized for some of their lights out manufacturing, where essentially it's minimal human interaction in the factory. There's a lot of autonomous robots and cobots, et cetera, that are in that facility. Um, but again, it's for the types of drugs that are like a small molecule, so oral solid dose, where when I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, there's minimal variables. So it'd be much harder to do it for cell and gene therapy. It'd be much harder to do it for biologics. Um, and there's a few others. I talk to companies where they're, I ask, are you are you doing digital twin representations of your factories, of the processes that are executed within those factories, the assets themselves, et cetera? And they will, many of these pharma companies will say, yes, I do, but it's in, a small pocket over here in my
Yeah.
business.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense to start small. It makes sense to prioritize the important growing businesses like biologics, cell and gene therapy. But, they make 100% of their revenue from 100% of their products. So the visibility, productivity, that digital infrastructure is eventually needed, right, in all of those
Right.
factories, the entire network. But there are a lot of challenges, right? Like, but before I talk about challenges and like, we all know our familiar challenge in the pharma industry, let's paint a picture about like for leaders who wants to change, who wants to make the leap, or they know that they're going to do it anyway because they have to, but they keep hearing these different trends in the industry. It's really hard to get your head around like what's going on, what are the macro trends, and everybody has a different view. I know you shared with me a slide, and I do have now a regular thing here in this podcast. I ask like, what is your killer slide or one thing that you want to share? I know you have one. I'm going to pull it up in a second, but tell us about what leaders should think in terms of those ongoing big trends and how they should wrap their head around like designing some strategy for the future. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at these trends, and what you're seeing here is a set of trends that are not, Mike went into an ivory tower somewhere and pontificated, what these things, should be. Rather, the focus point here was of the leaders in the industry or in the pharma industry. What are some of their big make or break initiatives that are going to help them stay competitive, continue to be the leaders in the industry, et cetera? And so these are some of them. The top 10. And if you want more detail, there's links to some articles that I wrote on Forbes that you can get a little bit more detail on those. But really, when we look at this, it's really about creating this digital ecosystem platform that is able to orchestrate your business in new and ways that you haven't done before. So in manufacturing, which is part of the overall supply chain itself, we're finding all these different models. We're seeing that the globalization model is starting to be broken up, and there's a more focus on regionalization, and that's because we got to be sustainable, and we got to reduce our environmental footprint, whether that be carbon or water or
Mhm.
waste, which don't get a whole lot of airtime, but are still big issues. And so building this ecosystem allows me to have a level of flexibility in how I take a very brownfield environment of a lot of legacy and provide an on ramp to my future platform. And so really that first trend at the very top is, really having a mechanism in which pharma organizations can orchestrate their extended ecosystem. And this is their logistics providers, distributors. This is maybe national stockpiles, ports of entry, rail, sea, air, the whole bit. And for a lot of farmers that are managing their logistics and distribution, this could be up to 400 different legal entities that they're dealing with that they have to manage. And, trying to, trace your goods, across that very large distribution network is tough. Now, some have chosen to do more of a 4PL model, which is essentially outsourcing your logistics and
Mhm.
distribution, which is fine too. That's what Microsoft does. Um, However, for certain areas like vaccines, it makes more sense to be closer to that the logistics and distribution. And I would imagine as we get into more precision medicine, that will also continue to be the case where we want to really be able to hone in and optimize the supply chain. And so what this is doing is it's creating a data platform. And so one of the big challenges that I was surprised about, coming into this industry was, data management, data governance, the availability of data, et cetera. You know, having a common data fabric that is able to govern across both what's in your four walls and what's outside your four walls becomes essential. And I can start to look across the entire value chain. And if I'm in R&D and I want to do research on creating a new drug that's similar to other drugs of ours, wouldn't it be great to be able to peek in and see what's going on in the marketplace?
Exactly.
Um, you know, even past clinical trials, right? This is because we can tap into wearables, we can do all sorts of things. But also, I could look at the manufacturing processes as well for the commercialization part and go, oh, maybe we could learn some things on how to do this better here in R&D to speed up things on our side and help with that pesky tech transfer
Yeah.
problem of introducing that into the supply chain. And so that's a huge one, and it's kind of a foundational one.
Yes.
You know,
So one comment there is like I was just yesterday I was with a client, and head of the clinical supply chain, and we talked about how different systems are used in the clinical versus commercial for some good reasons, but there are still silos in accessing what's happening in the commercial supply chain versus what is it that is happening in the clinical supply chain or R&D. Before this episode, I recorded one with the portfolio management head of former big pharma company, and there are some unknowns as well. Like it's hard to get crystal clear on everything. So bringing that visibility across platforms, even within your own organization, plus across other trading partners like your CMOs and your 3PLs, 4PLs,
yeah,
everything together is a big challenge. It's a very big effort as well. So I see here like also AI that you put in here, like AI
mhm,
everywhere. Like it's like the last 15 to 16 months since the popular launch of ChatGPT. Every
yeah,
C-level is talking about AI as well. So I believe one thing that we should highlight here is without the right ecosystem, the platform, and access to the right data, AI models are not going to work. Like, don't imagine an
absolutely.
AI model and let the AI save the day. No, the data is not there. Your AI models will not work. So don't waste your time and effort on the AI if you don't have the data platform.
I love, love, love that you said that because that's why I typically don't start this conversation with that kind of very sexy technology of generative AI, right? Which generative AI is great and it's compelling and exciting. However, it's one of many, many, many AI technologies that's part of this overall umbrella, right? But none of that's going to be possible. Digital twins and AI work and having single panes of glass, doing industrialized metaverse, AR, VR, MR models, etc. If I can't, what it boils down to is, do I trust my data?
Mhm.
And trust is an interesting word because what that's embodying is, do I have all the data to create a complete and accurate view? Or is it subjective or biased in some way because I have limited data? Do I trust the quality of that data? Right. Um, so there's many different factors when it comes to trust, the security aspect, et cetera. And so we have to be very, very careful when we jump into this AI world. Not only the ethics on what we deliberately do, but also the things that we're doing that could introduce things that we may not be aware of
Mhm.
or accidentally do. I mean, there's tons of stories. When I was at Gartner, I had talked to. I'll keep the actual name of the government entity a secret for now. Well, keep it secret. But there was a really bad implementation of AI that was used in the justice system that would, compile different pieces of information and come with a conclusion summary. And this particular system that was using these algorithms had bias built in. And what they
Of
were
course.
noticing was there were more people of color that were, you know, being infringed upon by the AI. And the AI itself doesn't know blue, brown, yellow, white, whatever, right? But the training model in which they use, they didn't have enough, like for example, more Caucasian or Asian use cases when they train the model. So
There's no
inherently,
guardrails, right? There are no
right,
guardrails to prevent any bias because the world we live in, it's full of bias, right? If you ask the generative AI to predict or just build a sentence around the doctor, the gender is assumed to be he, right? If you say a nurse, it's assumed a she. Well, that's bias built in, and the AI will basically take that in and spit out the same results. So what do you expect? So the same thing with the manufacturing systems, right? Like we are very busy with the manufacturing implementations, and if you only feed in certain type of data, certain failure data, or like only connect to certain type of machine, the type of AI model you're going to get out of it or the results will be only biased towards what you put in.
right,
Right, so it's like we should be careful about all the construct and architecture. So that's why, like, I think there's a little way to go before we can fully trust the AI. And we have this concept that we communicate to our clients: the hybrid model is better than individual, like machine only versus person or human only. The human intelligence, artificial intelligence, combined intelligence is better than
yeah.
either one of those intelligences, right?
You're absolutely right, and I call it the trust but verify system, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you've generated this, but let's spot check this. Let's make sure that it's
Mhm.
it's got everything right. Especially here in these early stages, we're moving so fast in kind of the evolution of this technology, and there's lots of room for bad things to happen. So, no, I'm glad that you said that. That's a really great point.
Yeah. So the other question that I keep pondering, and I am still like not 100% there with my conclusions because it's an ongoing process of learning, is why can't pharma go faster, versus other industries? Or is it happening? Is it speeding up already? I don't know. Like, why can't we go faster to adapt and transform? Like, what are those things that are holding us back? It's great to imagine the world of the visionary, like future factory of the future.
Yeah.
Everything is automated with co-pilot AI robots are helping us with everything. Microsoft has great videos on that, the teaser
Oh
videos that I
yeah.
watched. Thank you for sharing some of that. But like, what is holding us back?
What's holding us back? There's quite a few things, both you know, uh, technical and non-technical. And so, on the non-technical side, what we find is this. We talked about earlier, this risk aversion, right? And so that's something that slows folk down. And I had a conversation just 2 weeks ago. I was in a workshop and we were talking about this topic. What is the factory of the future? And it actually wasn't even that particular pharma company that made this comment. It was a consultancy that made this comment, which, just kind of blanketly said, well, we can't do that because of GMP. Um, and it's like, okay, let's let's decompose this a bit. Let's understand what is the specific requirement, and we can really start to identify, okay, truly, no, we can't do that. Or maybe we can do that, but we have to separate something else out and really innovate with these sets of processes, as an example. So I think what has happened over the years because of this risk aversion, it's easy to say, well, is it GXP compliant? Do other pharmas use it? I get that question a lot. Who else in pharma is doing this? Well, one, certain things I can't say because of non-disclosure agreements. But two, since this industry is so far behind other industries, I wouldn't be looking at your peers necessarily. I would be looking at, you
Other
know,
industries, yeah.
auto, right? Semiconductors, where you've got like Foxconn that has 60,000 reinforcement learning robots that have replaced significant amount of people in the process and has created a level of automation. That's why we can get an iPhone every year, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It
so
will otherwise take like a whole year to train up new employees. Now you
Right.
just like program the robots and get on with it. Like just a little comment, side comment. I did work like close to 20 years ago. I did work for Intel,
Yeah.
and I did in Arizona, and I did have a chance to visit one of their factories. That was like to this day, after 20 years and many, many other factories and other industries, mind-boggling as number one. Like there was no person on the floor. I said, "Where is the manufacturing? What's going on in here? Like this is not a factory." They said, "Look up." I looked up the monorails, like everything is automated. Things were going down, machines are taking it in, the processing, giving it out. Like there was no person on the floor, right?
Yeah.
That this type of automation and let's say digitalization existed already 10, 20 years ago in some other industries. So there's a lot of, like you said, things to learn. So don't look into, which is a very common pitfall in pharma, big pharma especially. Hey, what is my competitor doing? Like others, like where is the benchmark? Can I? Don't benchmark yourself to what is mediocre.
Yep.
Benchmark yourself to what is great, right? Other industries, other case examples.
Yeah, and so I think there's elements like that, the risk aversion and what bad behaviors that has bred. The other big issue is talent. There's most certainly a war for talent, right? Because a lot of the folks with this Gen AI background, predictive analytics, digital twins, etc. You know, they're working for a consultancy. Getting paid very well, being challenged, etc. And
Mhm,
big pharma's got to compete with that, and that's been a struggle. And so in some ways they've been at the mercy of consultancies to guide them through their transformation, which can be a challenge in and of itself,
or costly.
because it's costly. But at the end of the day, you didn't create your strategy; it was created for you, and no, you don't ever want to be in that type of position.
Mhm,
um, but then just the nature of the business, Everin, the what's interesting about it, and this is what makes it, even though it's old and boring, um, it's an interesting dynamic that you have to think through, in that um, we've got products that, like I said earlier, it's like a fruit. It's like a banana. It will expire in a certain amount of days, or in this case, years. And so for some of the stuff, I'm just going to let it die on the vine, right? I've already maximized the profits I can get out of this product. I'm
mhm,
not going to digitally transform this. And so, the reason why we see such a small percentage of that transformation is because it's usually on the areas like the biologics, mRNA, and,
mhm.
those types of processes. Or, we see like the weight management drugs, where
Oh yeah.
that one's interesting because that gets the pharma companies closer to the patient, which they haven't really been there yet. And they're able to tap into a smartphone, to a watch, or what
Mhm,
have you,
mhm.
to really create those insights.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is going to happen in waves, that's for sure. We are in the early innings of this transformation. That's also given. I think there's a lot of learnings to be had from other industries, but and then one part of this episode, or one part of this overall podcast, is to give back to industry and show them like what is out there, what is the vision, what is the future, and also what are the common challenges. So maybe to wrap up and maybe give like a final piece of comment or advice for specifically for those, let's say, C-level or senior leadership, whether it's
Yeah.
the head of the factory or head of the network of factories, or in the board of like medium or small or large pharma companies, who are, and I know a good number of them, who are thinking about getting started, but they're hesitant, or they were hesitant in the previous years. What would your advice be for them, especially like within this year? Like what should they look at, what should they do, where should they go for reading, and like what would be that maybe like a concise advice?
Yeah.
And they're listening to you now. No pressure.
All right, everybody. Here's what you need to do. I got the script for you. So, so here's what I would recommend. I would recommend, take a roadshow. Go and visit, some of these other industry leaders, and it's really easy to figure out who they are. It's the typical sources you can go to, your Gartners of the world, your World Economics of the world, etc. go to an industry trade show and you're going to find these organizations, and see what they do and why they do it. Why did they take this approach versus another? Visit adjacent industries. So if I'm in biologics, go visit with, AB and Bev as an example and see, how did Microsoft help them embed artificial intelligence into their factory lines and using vision technology for quality checks, and integrating chat gpt into the factory, the frontline worker, factory employees. Really learn, take the best practice from those and bring it back and challenge the status quo within the organization. Number one. Number two, I would you've done some research or due diligence, but what then tends to happen is, well, let's do a bunch of POCs, proof of concept, proof of value. They're all very similar constructs. Um, I would look at this from a risk management perspective. If you've got a technology approach, let's say like digital twins, is this a good idea or not? Well, we know that in the manufacturing world, all up, the answer is pretty clear. The answer is pretty clear on the business value that it generates and enabling things like predictive maintenance that's going to help me with, maximizing yield, which again will have many, many downstream effects. So I would most certainly get out of the mindset of everything has to be proved to the nth degree. If it's already been largely adopted by the industry, the risk is fairly low. So I would, like we talked about earlier, generative AI is something that we're all excited about. But that one, you want to tiptoe in because it's a case where it is new to the market. It's hot off the presses, right?
Mhm.
So, and then the third recommendation, I would say, really foster a culture of innovation. One of the biggest challenges that I see with some of the farmers that I'm working with is they're all great people. They all want to do the right thing. Um, they're a lot of these folks are wicked smart. The challenge is they're so ingrained in the tactical that they're not thinking about where this ultimately is going to go,
Mhm.
right? And so part of innovation isn't about the cool new widget that I'm creating. Innovation is about how I can fundamentally reinvent my business. It's it's a
Exactly.
simple thing like the guy at 3M that invented the post-it note, right? And by the way, it was an accident. That whole product was an accident because he was making an adhesive and he was like, this isn't working right. And then there's attached piece of paper.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, this is a great idea. So a lot of this, what you're hearing from me is less about the technology. The technology is a tool, right, to accelerate your business. How you wield that tool.
Mhm.
There's this old adage of a fool with a tool is still a fool, and
Yeah.
that's still the case here. So we want to make sure that we are able to really leverage and harness the power of these tools in the context of what our shareholders care about.
This was a great summary, Mike. I hope more and more people will be listening to this because it's going to be out on the internet, living and breathing, and it will reach to more people. I mean, we are in the. I mean, I did my research in my grad school studies on diffusion of innovation. So we are in the first phase of the diffusion of innovation, which is like the innovative phase. Like only the innovators, like your last point, like be more open, be more innovative. Those are the ones that are playing with these technologies, and they're going to reap the biggest benefits. But then
Yeah.
comes the next phase and the next phase until the inflection happens, and you cannot stop it anymore, because if you don't adapt, then you'll be a laggard, late adapter and laggard, which there won't be much revenue or cost efficiency gain against your competitors. So it's important to be cautious, but be more innovative. I like and I love that suggestion. But also, like, yes, I think McKinsey calls this the pilot purgatory. Like a lot of people are keep doing pilots and pilots and pilots. only to just kill the idea and move on to business as usual. So we need to get out of that mindset, and I hope that our listeners and the audience will start taking this more seriously, and they reach out for help as well. Like, they don't need to be alone doing this. They can reach out to you and Microsoft and Gartner and other thought leaders in the industry to get started.
I mean, a lot of this stuff's been done. I mean, you were at Intel. Intel had a really great crowdsourcing innovation program. I believe they called it was either Kickbox or that was maybe the Adobe one. But essentially, what you got was a kit, an innovation kit, and it had the process you should follow.
Wasn't that Edison? I think that it was called the kit called Edison kits.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
Kickbox was IoT kit. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Kickbox was Adobe. I always get them interchanged, but essentially what they did was they democratized innovation. They provided an incentive model where the employees were willing to take the risk, and so like you take a company like Intuit, their CIO had a failures award. In the failures award, it wasn't about that you necessarily failed, but it was more about what came out of that failure
and what you learned. Yeah.
Right. What'd you learn? And ultimately, what bred out of that? What great thing bred out of that? And so, instilling that in your culture is so important. And yes, it's a lot of work, and it may seem like in the short term, really not worth it, but really investing in your people and these practices will most certainly pay off.
Mike, thank you very much for all these great insights. I know the time is never enough we can talk all day long and all night long about these topics, but this was very inspirational. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and time with us, and hoping that we'll influence more people to change in the industry.
Thank you, Everin. Thanks for having me.